you're managing a multi-site program, you're going to need to have some form of site visits. Ideally, I think it works really great to have 2 formal in-person site visits with every site every term. Feel free to tell me if that doesn't work for you for some reason, if you have to sometimes make accommodations to do something as like a video virtual meeting, that may be possible. But that's the ideal, is 2 in-person formal site visits per term, per site. I say formal because, like I mentioned at the very beginning, if you can manage to work in any informal site visits, and I always warn sites that, I may have informal site visits where I just show up. They're a public place, I could just be there at some point. Then I try to always get at least a couple of informal site visits in as well. But the formal site visits are super important. And what I would do is I would always schedule the first formal site visit within what I called the honeymoon period. You know what this is, right? Like, there's always that time early in the term when the member is happy, they're still very idealistic about what they've signed on to do. The site supervisor is still happy with the member. They think it's all going to go great. They're talking to each other. It's a beautiful thing. So during that period where everything should be absolute roses, that's when I would do the first site visit. And you might be telling me, like, why then? There's nothing to learn. They're all happy. There's nothing to intervene on. It seems like a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. Because first of all, it associates you as someone who is there for them all the time. You're there when things go wrong, but you're also there to celebrate when things are going well. And you want to establish you as a contact early. Because what would often happen, and I'm sure this has happened to you, is that you would recruit the member, you maybe handle orientation for the new member, and then you place them at the site, and they do what they should do, which is they start bonding with the people at their site, and they start really associating themselves more with the site than with you and the larger program. And in fact, they might totally forget about you. I had plenty of members who didn't even remember what my name was because they were getting all invested in their site. So don't take it for granted that they still know who you are and that they know that you exist and that you are there as a resource. You have to remind them of that. And it's really great to do that while they're still in a good mood. So do that within, what I would usually do was like the first 3 to 6 weeks. If, again, on that matrix, that spreadsheet, if there were any red flags, those people would get scheduled first. So anyone who had any reason to be concerned, they would be 3 weeks. Less reason to be concerned, 4 weeks. Less 5 weeks, less 6 weeks. And just work it that way. And then what you're looking for, of course, is that you are looking for red flags. I mean, if there's anything obviously wrong within that first period, it's not going to magically get better. If they are already having time management issues within 3 to 6 weeks and their members and their supervisor is already frustrated, yeah, that's going to get a lot worse. So that's great to know. You have to find out if there's any issues that are just super on the surface, obvious right away. But oftentimes, whatever is the issue that's going to get worse is being masked during that first period because everyone's just kind of still making nice and working it out. So I wouldn't ask, like, what's the main issue that I need to figure out about? Because they don't necessarily know, they're not going to tell you. So instead, I had 2 questions that I would always ask. The first question was, what is something positive and unexpected that has happened so far since you have been here? So why that question? Well, I found it was often a nice moment because oftentimes the site supervisor would say something really nice about the member, and the member would be like, really? That's how you feel? You haven't told me that. And it was this moment to be like, yeah, let's celebrate these positive things. It also helped that word expectation, that what was positive but unexpected was often an interesting conversation, because people would say, well, I expected that she would be a hard worker, but I didn't expect that she'd know so much about this topic, which has been great. So that was also helpful because it would help to suss out where are things going a little differently than they had expected when the term started. And you always want to know where the surprises are, because that's either where the really rich, interesting, fun stories come from, or that's where the potential challenges down the road come from, because most people don't like surprises. The second piece of it that I always asked was, what is something that you haven't done yet that you are looking forward to in the next quarter or the next 6 months? Usually give them a time frame. This, again, often led to interesting conversations between the member and the supervisor. I would ask them both these questions, so they both have to answer. And the member would often get a chance to say, well, actually, I was really hoping I would get to visit this project that we're working on. And sometimes they hadn't had the courage, or they're just not, they just don't speak unless asked to. You would find that members would say something and the supervisor would be like, oh, we can totally do that. I didn't know you wanted to do that. And so it helped to get the communication flowing more easily and sort of modeled for the site supervisor and the member, hey, here's some things that maybe you want to talk about together. And I would encourage those conversations while I was there. And oftentimes it would start with me asking questions, but then it would sometimes lead to them having a conversation in front of me, which I would just encourage and be like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot to talk about. I'll leave you to it. So that always was very successful. Then I would wait, and I wouldn't have the next formal site visit until usually the third quarter of their term. So after the halfway point for sure. And I wanted to try to schedule those when I thought they probably had experienced some sort of tension or conflict, and when I might be able to come in and help smooth over or figure out if some sort of intervention was necessary. Those often got a little bit more spread out because it would depend on how each member seemed to be doing, and I could, schedule those according to what kind of feedback I was getting and if the members seemed like there were any challenges. But always beware, if there is a member who's super quiet, it's just like with toddlers. If you can't hear them anymore, it's either going really well or more likely there's something breaking somewhere and you should go find out what it is. So that was always a good thing to know too.